Welcome to another video in the series where I am exploring JavaScript and how it handles object-oriented programming. In this video we are going to be covering OLOO, not sure. It is objects linking to other objects. Alright, once you walk through this design pattern, you'll see it's really not too much to it. So we're just going to start off with a simple object literal person, and we have a few properties defined on it: functions: eat, sleep, code, repeat. And let's just go ahead, like we can call this method off of our person object here. Looks like we're running into some issues here. Well, I guess I should have expected there to be some issues with this person. Well, you know what, let's go ahead and clean this up. So we've simplified our person down a bit. Looks like there might still be some issues, but possibly of a different nature. And so now we go to access these properties and the values at those properties, and we can log and get the expected values, whether the property or by running the function at that property. And so this all works basic object literal syntax, but let's say we wanted to build off of this and we wanted to describe a household per se. And we have a person and we want to describe maybe other persons in that household that might inherit things that all persons in the household share in common. So we use object create to create a new object and use our person object as the prototype for person 2, which we know it's going to point the hidden prototype reference up to this object. Okay, and then we can log the properties that are now associated with person 2. Okay, we get the expected values, but if we check on person 2, doesn't have any of its own properties. It's really just inheriting everything from the person object. We haven't done anything to add properties to person 2 itself. Well, to be honest, our example really isn't that helpful as it is. We know that each person is going to have a different name. They may all eat and sleep. This title, whatever this is, that's probably going to be different for every person. So let's reconfigure our example to be a little more helpful for describing what we're going for with the household. Okay, so we have our person object. We have the methods, the functions that each person uses and does. We have our Milton object that we are creating with the person as its prototype, and then we can assign some properties to Milton. So we can see that our example is getting more useful and improving in more ways than one. And then when we log the values, we can get what we expect here, and we can see that the Milton object has its own property, name and wheres, and it doesn't own the properties eat and sleep. So all of this lines up with our diagram as we expect. But we're still taking these separate actions here. What can we do to improve the way that this object creation pattern is working? We can take our property initializations right here with name and wheres, and we can wrap those into a method on our person object. Then we can call that method, and we still get everything working. Just as an aside, I called this Booyah because conventionally this is named init, and for a little while, I thought that init was a keyword or something special in JavaScript, but it's not. So I wanted to use booyah here just to show that it isn't. Alright, so now that we have cleared that up, let's go ahead and we'll put it to init just so that we can practice and keep rolling. This is the basics, just the bare bones explanation of objects linked to other objects. There's no great mystery here. It's just using the hidden prototype reference to link objects up the chain. But we can improve this a little bit if we'd like. This is now on 2 lines. We can wrap it up into 1 line. We will need to change our init function here. And the key to think about this is the keyword this. Okay, so I'll change the code here. So we include the method call to init on the same line. We're method chaining here. But in order to do this, we have to change our init function to return this. So if we look at what's going on here, object.create is creating a new object using person as a prototype. So all of these things are in the prototype. That returns an object back here. Well, at that point, init is a method on that object that was returned, so we can call that method, which we do, and that object being called is the execution context for this. So that object then has the name it's assigned, the wheres it's assigned, and then it returns that same object at the end. And when we pass these in, we're completing the loop and we're giving it all the information it needs. So when we finish this whole line here, we're ending up with the same thing essentially. And when we log our values down here, everything continues to work as expected. So we can create other person objects, and this is where we see some of possibly the advantages of using the objects linking to other objects creation pattern, in that we can still use these things. Milton, sleep, Shelley, eat, these still work, but we don't have the memory weight of these methods being uniquely created on every single object that we create from the person object. And we can continue down the line and get a Milton Jr. object. We're going to create this object identically really to the same way that we created the others, except instead of Milton Jr. Inheriting and being a prototype of the person object, we're going to use Milton Jr. as a prototype of the Milton object. And so we can pass our values in, we come down, we see that when we log these values, I'm full, the onesie, all these things continue to work as we hope, and then we can check the prototype of Milton Jr. and see that it does strictly equal the Milton object. And then we can even add some functionality to Milton here. Let's say that Milton has a temper, and not all persons have a temper, but Milton does. Here's Milton. Well, Milton Jr. could very well, and in this case in JavaScript, does inherit that temper from Milton. So we come down here and we can still, Milton Jr. can still have a temper, and we log it and we see here's Milton Jr. So all these things are just supporting and kind of fleshing out the objects linking to other objects creation pattern. Pretty simple, especially after we've gone through all of the prototypes and constructors, but this is another option for working with object-oriented programming. Just as a brief aside, we're all familiar with the parent-child nomenclature, with younger objects, if you will, inheriting from older objects. Anyone in favor of a naming change for this object creation pattern? I'm just saying. Anyone? Anyone?